This is Bob. Bob is about to join this awesome game, Tower Defense Simulator, for the first time. It's a cool game about little towers shooting zombies. Little does Bob know that 5 years ago in this game, there was a boss and the only one in history that killed towers. There was an event in which you got a tower that would eventually become the best for speedrunning, the Gladiator, and that overall, every single mode was completely different. Unfortunately for Bob, there's no way for him to ever experience this. He's 5 years late. It's not his fault, but it's not like he can travel back in time, right? Or can he? No, I'm not going to do that. But seriously, there's a game, Retro TDS, and it's going to be linked in the description, that just updated and has the most accurate recreations of all of these old events and gameplay. So poor old Bob, if he suddenly decides he wants to see what the game was like 5 years ago, well, now he can. And me personally, I'm going to be beating the entirety of old TDS, and I strongly urge that you do as well, because they're going to have some cool custom content, like the shortest map in TDS history, and potentially a sick event if the game gets enough players. So just play the game, that is, after this video, where I beat one of the hardest bosses that TDS has ever had for an event, the longest game mode that TDS has ever had, consisting of 68 waves, and of course the Raider boss, the one that kills your towers. Like, subscribe, use StarCode E, hop into full screen, and let's go back in time. Here I am in the old lobby. First, I have to equip some towers. I decide to equip some relatively early game towers because the first mode that I'm going to be playing on is easy mode. I start off by getting some snipers. These guys one-shot the normal zombies and the speedy zombies, so these things make early game pretty dang easy. I save up enough money for a farm, and the farm back then is very different from the one nowadays. The best way to farm is just to spam level 1s, because that's the most cost-efficient level. So I get my level 1 farm, but then the game sends some slows at me. These things are pretty tanky, so I added an extra sniper to my defense, and that was enough. I then placed down an enforcer, which is the old version of the shotgunner, and this thing would be pretty good. It would one-shot the enemies. After getting down another farm, I'd place down a pyromancer. The reason for this is because back then, pyromancer used to actually slow down the enemies, so this was going to be a great support option. On wave 8, there was a normal boss, which went right past my pyro and my enforcer, and I had to rely on my snipers to take it down. Thankfully, sniper is goated, so I could just get back to farming a little bit more. Except I shouldn't have done that, because on wave 10, there's some hidden enemies. I had to quickly upgrade a sniper in order to try and take some of them down, and even then, I still had to tank some HP. Thankfully, I now had a lot more damage, so when the game rushed me with 2 more bosses, I took them out pretty easily. On wave 13, there were mysteries. These break into a random enemy when they're killed, and thankfully, none of them spawned bosses, so I was good. Wave 14 had a necromancer, and even though this thing only spawns normal enemies, because my snipers have such a slow fire rate, they actually get overrun by these normals. I actually had to get some high level upgrades on my snipers just to take this guy down. On wave 17, there was a slow boss that had 1200 HP. Can we just go back for a second? This is easy mode, right? You can see that back then, easy mode wasn't being very easy. Anyways, this boss was problematic and I had to upgrade my snipers in order to defeat it. Just as I thought that things were okay, on wave 20, Moltens would come out. These aren't supposed to be scary because they don't have a lot of HP, only 100. Except they regenerate HP. So my snipers literally weren't doing enough damage because the Moltens were out healing them. So I ended up losing to easy mode. One must only imagine how hard the later modes get. Anyways, I was back and using minigunners. Level 2 minigunner was insanely overpowered, and so when it came time for the Moltens, I did way more damage than they could heal, and I was completely okay. The game tried to then rush me with some very fast lightnings, but those were also no problem. After I started getting max level minigunners, it became too much for the enemies to handle, and I was basically able to wipe out every subsequent round, which included some pretty tough enemies like super mysteries that spawned bosses, and that was about the only hard part. I made it to wave 35 where I had 8 minigunners, 6 commanders, and a single max level pyromancer to slow everything down. Back then you could only place a maximum of 15 towers, so this was as strong as my defense was gonna get. Now commander today can make your towers fire 50% faster, but back then, if you used a bunch of commander's abilities at the same time, you could make your towers 2 times, 10 times, as much as 50 times stronger if you just spammed enough commanders down. So using this little technique, I was able to absolutely melt the Gravekeeper, which was the boss for the easy mode. And then I almost died to a mystery boss who was spawning super mysteries, but thankfully I took him out and easy mode was beaten. Now, if that was only easy mode, normal and the other modes are gonna get pretty insane. And as a matter of fact, they did. For normal mode, I tried using Crook Boss, whose gimmick is spawning these little crooks that come out of the back of the map to add some extra firepower. I was also using Sentry, because this is an old tower that was removed back then. The way Sentry works is the longer it attacks an enemy, the more damage it does, kind of like charging up its fire rate, except it wasn't strong enough. For normal mode, on Wave 35 came out a Gravekeeper, and now you might recall, Wave 35 looks exactly the same on easy mode, so why am I seeing it on normal mode? And after losing, I realized this. All of these game modes send out the exact same enemies, it's just that the harder modes have more waves slapped onto the end. So by playing Insane mode, I'd be playing through the entirety of easy, normal, and hard mode. And you guess what I did? That's right. It was time to play Insane mode. For this, I was going to be bringing some of the best towers in the game. John, which is able to damage buff my towers. Turret, which is the highest DPS tower in the game. Outlaw, which I mean, you'll get to see how strong it gets. And of course, Commander, so that I could do the little trick where I boost a bunch of them up at once. In the early game, I farmed a little bit and lost some HP, but it was worth it for the money, because then I got a John, and this thing was almost strong enough. It wasn't quite, so I had to get a second one down, but this allowed me to get up some decent farming, and eventually, because hiddens were coming, I had to upgrade one of the Johns. Now this level of John does 5 damage a shot, and fires fast, so I mean this thing absolutely demolished the hiddens, and I felt pretty safe for the next few rounds, so I got some decent farming. But after getting some terrible RNG, a bunch of bosses out of the mysteries, I was forced to place down a turret. Now turret was going to make a big difference because this thing was doing a ton of damage per shot, so we basically just started absolutely annihilating all of the enemies. Because of this, I was able to get all of my farms to level 3, and even get a max level farm, while only having to get a few turret upgrades here or there. On the wave where the Boltons came out, I had some PTSD from what happened on easy mode, so I got down an Outlaw, and I'll admit it probably wasn't necessary, because the Moltons got shredded. But the other enemies were a little bit tough, and the slow boss got actually pretty far. This called for a second turret, and now everything was actually no problem again. That is, until wave 26. This started rushing me with a lot of lightnings, and I tanked some health. I wasn't going to accept that, so I upgraded my John, and now we were doing plenty of damage once again, destroying the enemies. By the way, I forgot to mention, I maxed my farms, so now I was getting a bunch of money every wave. So, max level turret. This thing's DPS was absolutely insane, and the enemies were being killed at the front, except for when they weren't, but then they still wouldn't even get far anyways. From here on out, the plan was to work on max level outlaws. These things were just the strongest towers in the game. Combined with 2 max level turrets and a max John, none of the enemies were really a problem. And when it came time for the Gravekeeper, I used my John's ability to multiply everyone's damage, used my Commander ability to multiply everyone's attack speed, and as you can imagine, the Gravekeeper got shredded. On wave 38, there were some boomers, and what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to blow up and stun all the towers around them. Except because I killed them at the front, there was nothing for them to stun. On wave 39 would come out a tank. Now this guy is supposed to throw a bunch of boulders at your towers to stun them. The thing is, when he was supposed to throw his boulders, he was too far from my towers. And when he got close enough, I'd already killed him off. So basically I had my towers placed perfectly such that he would never actually get a chance to throw his boulders. Wave 40 tested that theory by sending out 3 tanks, but I still killed them way too quickly before they could even throw their first set of boulders. On wave 41, there were some creepers, which when killed, were supposed to stun your towers, but again, my towers were too far away. So that wave ended up just being completely easy. Wave 42 spammed me with a bunch of necromancer bosses, but because my outlaws actually have a little explosion when they shoot the enemies, that little explosion was more than enough to handle all the stuff these necromancer bosses were spawning, so I had no trouble with them. Wave 43 had some boomer 2s, which were just supposed to be a stronger boomer. Again, this had no effect on me because I'm overpowered. And now on wave 43, I had all 15 of my towers down. Considering Insane mode is the longest mode in TDS history, having 68 waves, that means I now have to survive the next 25 waves with no upgrades to my defense. That was worrying me a little bit, because every wave was only just going to get harder and harder, so 25 waves later, you could expect it to be pretty dang difficult. In the meantime though, it's wave 46. The game realized that those previous tanks were way too easy, so it sent out some fire tanks. These were immune to the pyromancers, so they wouldn't be slowed down, but they weren't immune to my outlaws, which completely shredded them after I gave them 2 commander abilities. Wave 47 tried some more of these tanks, and they were no problem. Wave 49, guess what? Even more of these tanks, and wave 50 was actually the Molten boss. This guy was the final boss for the normal mode, except because I'm on insane mode, I have to beat him, then I have to beat the hard mode, and I have to beat the rest of whatever is in insane mode. To get through him though, I just used my commander abilities and my John, and my outlaws, well, I mean, I think you could tell. They did the job. Wave 52 had these Shrike crystals, which just made absolutely big spikes on the track. These things just look cool, but they aren't really dangerous. Wave 54, I saw a Witch Doctor, which was healing the enemies around it. Thankfully, because the outlaws have their little splash damage, they were able to destroy this little horde like it was nothing, even though they were healing. Wave 55 was a cool way to change things up because it now had some of these Witch Doctors combined with Gravekeepers, so I was literally getting multiple easy mode bosses, but they were at the same time being healed. Of course, when I boosted my commanders, it didn't really matter. On wave 58 would come out some Goldens. These enemies were immune to explosions, so towers like Rocketeer would actually not be good for them. Thankfully, I wasn't using Rocketeer, so yeah, just like everything else, they got destroyed. On wave 60, it was time for the hard mode boss, the Golden Titan. This guy had a ton of HP, until I used all of my abilities. This got him pretty low, but it didn't kill him, and he kept spawning a bunch of his little minions to come rush out, but that was way too weak. He just dies. Now there's only 8 more waves in insane mode, and I'm gonna be honest, insane mode was actually pretty easy compared to what's coming next. There was just some frozen enemies that came out, which had quite a bit of HP. On wave 65 there was a frost hero, which without using any abilities, actually got pretty far down the track. Wave 67 would double that number, and I was still gonna try not using any abilities because I was saving them for 68, and I'll just tell you, they got a little bit farther than I wanted to, like actually towards the back of the map. But here's 68, the final wave which spams you with a bunch of enemies and 3 frost heroes. This is one of the strongest waves in the game, only a couple hundred times easier than what I'm gonna be doing later. That is not a joke, but you know, I boost up my commanders and yeah, frost heroes kinda get shredded. They still make it pretty far because there's 3 of them, but the 4 main modes are now all essentially completed. So it's time to move on to the events. Area 51. This is the only event in TDS history that had a boss that could literally shoot and kill your towers for good. He wouldn't just stun them, he would kill them. I was gonna use the same exact loadout I did for insane mode because, well, it's a good loadout. And the early game looked a little bit the same, where I used John's, tried working for that level 2 upgrade because, you know, 5 damage a shot is pretty dang juicy. And the save up took a bit, I had to leak some enemies, but after I got it and started destroying, it was time to get some farming done. As I thought the game was just giving me a bunch of free money, it sent out these Zoomers. These guys don't have that much HP, but they're fast, and there's a lot of them. So what I did was I placed another farm. I mean, I guess that doesn't make the most sense, but after I skipped, I had enough money to upgrade my other John, which was thankfully strong enough to counter these Zoomers. The game also sent out these lawnmower-looking aliens, which actually have a ton of HP. I even ended up leaking one of them on wave 10, and this was actually kind of scary, but thankfully, I was able to tank it, but realized we can't let this happen. So I placed down a turret, and as you can imagine, the turret makes a pretty big difference. On wave 12 there was some hidden Zoomers, but it's a little known fact that these things were actually glitched back in the original TDS in 2019, and this game, because it's an accurate recreation, actually made them glitched as well, so they weren't even hidden, and with my turret and Johns I was able to shred them. In fact, the turret and Johns were strong enough for me to get all of my level 3 farms just before these UFOs. These guys are flying in the air. Thankfully, that doesn't mean that my towers can't see them. Back then, there was no such a thing as flyings like in modern hardcore where you need ace pilot or something to take down the flying enemies. Instead, you could literally just shoot them, right? It's kinda cool how old TDS had more logic than the modern one. Anyways, on wave 17, I got paid $50,000 just as the game would start sending out these raiders. These guys were so much stronger than the enemies I was seeing before, and they were just continuously stunning my stuff. So it was time to get some outlaws down because they were unstunnable. Even though I believe they should have been, it might just be a bug. But yeah, with these 2 outlaws, a commander, and an upgraded turret, it was actually not that difficult, especially since the raiders would just be stunning my farms a lot of the time. Speaking of raiders, Wave 18 had Raider 2s. These were basically just stronger Raider 1s that stunned my towers by shooting frost beams at them. Thankfully, not all that difficult because my unstunnable outlaws just took care of them. Wave 19 was more of the same, and I maxed out a commander, but Wave 20, well, it was time. Just the previous wave, I was fighting 2,000 HP Raider 2s. Now it's time to fight a 40,000 HP Raider boss that, keep in mind, could kill my towers. I began by selling all of my farms and spamming down commanders because I was planning on doing my trick where I just use all of their abilities. Raider boss saw this and thought, oh no you don't, and just killed one of my commanders. Unfortunately for him, I had 7 more, and after using all of them, I was actually dealing some pretty hefty damage to him. I started rebuying commanders to use their abilities again, and what do you know? He kills another one. At least he's not killing the outlaws. We don't have to tell him about that. But I placed down a bunch more commanders, use an ability, and that actually gets the outlaws firing fast enough to the point where the raider boss is low. Unfortunately for raider boss, it is too late. I've dealt too much damage and my outlaws have range on him for a while. I start placing down a bunch of Johns because I wanted him to kill them, not my outlaws, but when I turned around I noticed only one outlaw was left on the cliff, so he did kill an outlaw. But didn't matter. I beat the raider boss, which actually turned out to be easier than I thought, and so there were only 2 more things to do. I mean, how hard could it possibly... I'd regret saying that. It was actually really difficult. Sword fight on the heights. This event is absolutely no joke. You can actually play it on multiple different difficulties, and I tried it on normal mode, only to realize that there's absolutely no way that I was going to be able to win because there's just so many enemies. I mean, what can you do about all that? So for the first time, I actually had to get a team because of how hard this event was. Fun fact, I actually played the real thing back in 2019, except it was too hard and I lost. That's just to give you some perspective, but regardless, we got a team of 6 and we'd end up playing on insane mode. Thankfully, the early game was looking a lot easier. It was sending out a bunch of really high HP enemies, but because the game spawns us in with over $2,000 of starting cash, we actually had some minigunners, an outlaw, and a commander right off the bat. In my loadout, I brought Commando, which is the event tower that you get from beating Raider Boss, and it was also one of the strongest towers at the time, so I thought it would be pretty good. I'd use Rocketeer early on because there were a lot of hordes, and everything was looking pretty reasonable early on. We were killing most things at the front, and for a defense that consisted of outlaws, minigunners, a commando, a commander, a Rocketeer, and everything, this seemed like it was going to be pretty easy. But then came out Wave 8. This wave had a Crystallite with almost 2,000 HP. On Wave 8! Thankfully, we had enough preparation to take it out, but this was just going to be the start. On Wave 9, there were 2 Crystallites with a bunch of mystery enemies, which now started punching back pretty far through the range of our minigunners. Not to mention, our stuff would also just get stunned whenever they died, so that wasn't very fun. On Wave 10, there were some of these brutes, which work exactly like the tanks would in insane mode, so they'd just go around throwing rocks at our stuff and stunning it, while the Crystallites with a bunch of HP would be tanking all the hits. Despite this brutal combination, we somehow managed to take it out. And I would upgrade my Rocketeer because the hordes were starting to get pretty dense, you know? And so Rocketeer was getting in some pretty decent damage, but the stuff just kept pushing further and further. The combination of all the difficult enemies was unreal. But on Wave 12, yes, only one wave later, it was time for the final boss, Swordmaster, with over 120,000 HP. Keep in mind, just the previous round, the stuff had only 2,000 HP. So I had to sell all of my farms, which I expected to be using for at least like the next 3 rounds. And I got up a max level Rocketeer. Now what was super tricky about Swordmaster is he would send out these fallen heroes with 4,000 HP and he'd just continuously spam them. If you couldn't kill them fast enough, you wouldn't even do any damage to Swordmaster. It was no surprise that the first time around, we got absolutely destroyed by these fallen heroes. By the way, I should mention in my loadout, I had Freezer, which I was supposed to max out so that I can use its ability to freeze the Swordmaster, but I didn't even have the money to do that. Anyways, Attempt 2 was starting to look a lot better. We had a bunch of level 2 minigunner spam, I had a turret in a nice spot, there was a bunch of outlaws placed down that wouldn't get stunned, and this time I didn't farm way too hard, so I had more money. I placed down some commanders, some outlaws, and now it was basically just time to hope that this was enough to defeat the Swordmaster. It was starting to look pretty good, and all of our tower spam was actually starting to deal damage to the Swordmaster. Unfortunately, Swordmaster used an ability which stunned basically every single important tower that we had. He'd start spamming Fallen Heroes, for which I'd get a Pyro because I wanted to slow them down as they'd approach the Swordmaster, and those would get pretty dang in the way. I'd start moving my towers in order to try and get in some more damage dealt, and it was actually starting to look pretty doable. We had a bunch of outlaws that were seeing the Swordmaster, we had high-level minigunners, we had commanders, a John, and Swordmaster was moving along the final stretch. His HP was ticking down, it was merely a couple thousand, it went down to just 1,000, but some fallen heroes made it past. This was a tragedy. This was the closest attempt I've ever had, even considering back then the old days when I played in 2019, to finally beating Swordmaster. So you know what they say? Third time's the charm, and believe it or not, we had a bunch of our minigunners again, even more outlaws, I had more commanders in better spots this time, and we had a bunch of high-level freezers at the back, which we would use to freeze the Swordmaster, as well as all the other enemies, especially the fallen heroes that would come by. And so came the Swordmaster. The outlaws fired, the commanders boosted, the freezers froze, and the minigunners, they just emptied their rounds onto the Swordmaster. The max level minigunners further back absolutely carried here because they would do so much damage. And with some final commander usage, a couple of pyro placements, we'd kill off the fallen heroes, and slowly but surely bring down Swordmaster's HP to 0, beating the second hardest thing that exists in retro TDS. In fact, there's one more boss in this game, so strong that he'd compare to modern TDS's Void Reaver. And for these old towers that rarely even have 100 DPS, this boss is very well just one of the hardest things, period. And I was going to be beating it solo. I'm of course talking about the old Hidden Wave. This wasn't even around back in 2019. This was added in 2020, but Retro TDS, they made sure to include this Easter egg for all those people out there who like a challenge. If you beat Insane Mode in under 32 minutes, which by the way, it took me over 40 minutes to do it, and I was killing everything pretty dang quick. So if you were to beat it in under 32 minutes, you would activate the Hidden Wave. This would just rush you with a bunch of enemies that had more HP than the literal Gravekeeper. If you really like a challenge and you want to do this legitimately, you have to bring Freezer, constantly micro its ability, have multiple people bring commanders, and try and micro their abilities all at the same exact time if you just want to survive these enemies. After I used all of my commander abilities, it was completely impossible for me to defeat these hordes. So what did I do? I cheated a little bit, okay? I sent out a bunch of Doomsday tanks, which have 2000 HP and do absolutely crazy damage, and thankfully I was able to push the enemies back. The game would then have Jaxus, which were very fast, and even stronger than the freaking Golden Titan. You just casually spit out 2 of these bosses, which are harder than the hard mode boss, you know, that's just Hidden Wave for you. And if some enemies were too easy, here's an 850,000 HP Mechanical Rod. You remember that Swordmaster which had 100,000? Nah. Here's 8 times as much as that. Now your towers are getting constantly stunned. If you're not using your commander abilities, then how are you even surviving? And if that wasn't enough, here's a creator with 1.2 million HP. Yeah, this wave is just insane. I literally had to give myself health just to survive this wave. But hey, wait a second. That was every boss in Retro TDS. And honestly, I think it's your turn. As I said, the game's link is in the description. And I really believe that most people are going to have a ton of fun playing this. In fact, you can even see me playing. And then, you know, we'll get to admin abuse. I don't know, have some fun. Anyways, yeah, like, subscribe, use StarCode E. And thank you for watching.